Hello, America, and to our friends around the world, greetings. Welcome back to everybody. This is part two. Part one, I introduced the statement by Pearl Davis that men don't need women, then touched upon the technology that's available or being developed to become available, and that is the artificial wombs, cloning, and test tube babies. I suggested the motivation behind this is because of the discrimination in education and in hiring and in the family courts and in government in general. And we touched upon the concept that art imitates life. And George Lucas, whether he intended to do this or not, was able to demonstrate that even in a modern fairy tale, modern mythology, that there's certain laws that are immutable, and that is a traditional nuclear family is the most competent in producing children that are well adapted and emotionally mature to go out into the world. That single mothers are the greatest failure of producing children that are not capable of even finishing school, let alone going into the world emotionally mature enough to interact with it. And that single fathers are almost on the same level as the traditional nuclear family. All of this was covered in that 11 minutes or so of the previous video. So I don't want to belabor the topic here. What I'd like to do is continue on with Anakin's rant, what he did to the Tusken Raiders that had captured his mother. And you can say, well, that was justified. And yes, you could make that argument that what he was, his emotional instability was that, a result of that. And I'm not discounting that. What I'm trying to exhibit is there is escalations, and you can see this in his progress from the first movie to the second movie to the third movie when he becomes Darth Vader. That he is rash, he is emotional, and that he is subject to manipulations that will lead to the Chancellor being able to groom him into becoming the monster. Think of the Chancellor as the gang leader who has identified the neighborhood prodigy and has groomed him for his criminal enterprise because he knows that that mother is incapable of setting boundaries. That is what's happening here.
And not just the men, but the women and the children too. They're like animals, and I slaughtered them like animals. I hate them.
All right, so we've covered quite a bit of information with Anakin and his failings. You can go back and review the movie yourself because I don't want to get this clip heavy, but there's plenty of examples from the elevator ride to Senator Amidala's penthouse where Obi-Wan chastises him about following his lead to his deleted scene where he gets into a fight with if I'm not mistaken, a young Greedo that Qui-Gon breaks up. There's other examples throughout the three movies, the three prequel movies of Anakin losing his temper. But this one I felt was the most significant because he has a disregard for others so severe that it's not just that who had committed the crime, but anybody even remotely associated was, by definition, guilty and was to be treated as such. Now let's segue into what you could consider as the great dragon in the room, and that is, but Boba Fett didn't grow up to become a good guy. Number one, Boba Fett was raised significantly by others such as Ara Singh, a woman bounty hunter, after Mace Windu had beheaded his father. Boba Fett was approximately, 12 years old at the time, and saw the traumatic action of what happened to his father. The other part of it is but Jango also wasn't a good guy. He was the template for the clone army. All you have to do is go back and review the end of Attack of the Clones. The clones were the heroes, and review the beginning of Revenge of the Sith. And up until the Temple assault, essentially the clones were still the good guys. And then if you watch the Clone Wars, was it 7 seasons that they had? Cody and Rex, Fives, man, it was a bummer what happened to Fives, man. But anyway, uh, Hard Case and Cut Up, all of those guys, they were all heroes. They were built up all throughout that 7 seasons as being the good guys and taking action as the good guys. The point I'm trying to illustrate is Jango Fett wasn't a bad guy. He was a bounty hunter. He was an enforcer. He was an extension of the government, a contract by hire to help it tame the space version of a wild, wild west, not too dissimilar to the taming of the old west in North America. So he sided with the bad guys. Even Padme Amidala asks Anakin, "Are we on the wrong side? The Republic isn't what it once was. It is, that it has fallen into disrepute. It's been corrupted." Even Palpatine makes that claim in the first movie. The Separatists recognize the corruption and the lack of representation. Whether they were good or bad, you can't assign those aspects to a political ideology, in my opinion. Maybe you can. I mean, certainly communism's bad, socialism's bad, but the people that go towards it see it as a means to achieve a better good, and that's short-sighted. But without getting into the weeds of that, the separatists recognized something that was not beneficial to their people, and therefore they left. So you could make your arguments that, oh, but Jango Fett and then later Boba Fett, he did that to Han Solo. Han Solo was a rogue, criminal, drug smuggler, pirate who was associated with an extremist, violent organization. Yeah, there's a lot of ways of looking at this from different points of view. Many people, in particular, you know, view this as a propaganda piece. To the victor go the spoils. Whoever wins writes the history. That is what's happening here. So, what can't be denied, though, is the connection between Jango Fett and Boba, and that is of father and son. Even though Boba was an identical clone to himself, he regarded him as a son, treated him as family, trained him in everything that he was trained in. If you've ever seen the television series Psych, Jango Fett is the Henry Spencer to the Boba Fett Sean Spencer. And that is, with that focus and that dedication, you go from being, top of your class to the top of your skill set to being the pinnacle, the apex, the one that has every bit of skill, every bit of training. The hyper, almost hyper sense of perception and ability.
They are using a bounty hunter named Jango Fett to create a clone army.
So the skills Jango Fett was passing on to Boba Fett were the skills that he had mastered and achieved success. 100 years ago, it was very common that men would take their sons with them and do the work that needed to be done. Whether it was fixing a barn, corralling animals, building the garden, or you know, going on a fishing boat, cutting trees, whatever it was that was needed, shoeing horses, blacksmithing, for example. Um, these skills were passed from father to son. And that is what's being done here. Whether you have a high or low or an indifferent opinion of bounty hunting isn't relevant. It is the fact that the father recognized that in order to be able to not just survive, but do well and succeed, you had to pass on a marketable skill. That is something that is lacking. I want you to consider the political movement, and it is a political movement, the so called take our daughters to work. This was done, whether directly or not, to, to displace boys and men from the workplace. And why this matters is it is very sexist, very bigoted, and it shoves boys off to the side. It puts preferential treatment on girls and women in a workplace. And this has a debilitating effect on an individual. And you could say, well, this is retribution for hundreds of years or thousands of years to pay upon to pay the price of the sins of previous generations for somebody who hasn't done the act. That is that's evil. Bottom line is, Jango Fett was successful at his career. To use the psych example, Henry Spencer was successful as a police officer. Both of those men passed those skills to their respective sons. And not too long ago, roughly 100 years and prior, fathers raised their sons to take over the family business. Even today, you can see it. Business and sons on storefronts, factory signs, trucks, everywhere, whether it's plumbers, whether it's lawyers, whether it's doctors, teachers, ministers, it doesn't matter. There is something to be said for the father passing to the son the inherited business. But there's many reasons behind that, and it's not a discriminatory thing towards women. It is just traditionally men keep the family name, and therefore it would always be such and such and son until that line is no more. And that's what Jango Fett is doing. He's teaching his son a skill that he has mastered and become successful, and he's passing it on. And it is something that our society has lost. And it was so effective that even at the age of 12, Boba Fett had an aptitude, as demonstrated with the clips that I'm going to provide. Right off the bat, you see Boba Fett assisting his father attempt to eliminate a threat by calling it out, and then proceeding into the spacecraft, manning the weapons, and assisting his father so that they could make their departure. I wanted to include other shots, but you've seen the movies. You know that they go through all this stuff together, and he's learning it. And already at the age of 12, he's mastered so much. In contrast with that, the so-called immaculate conception of a slave raising, a woman slave raising a son in poverty, uh, you got to ask the question. Places such as France, where it's illegal to get a paternity test, where paternity fraud is rampant, so-called immaculate conceptions are everywhere, that it's even discouraged in places such as Britain, that, what is it, 30% or more of births are paternity fraud. All you have to do is a little bit of digging where people find out either through medical procedures or genuine curiosity, and then just the outright verbal violence that women have in trying to discourage it, attempt to shame weak men from seeking paternity tests. Then you got, well, I don't want to get into it. Save that for later. But bottom line is, you have a child born into poverty of Anakin who keeps that chip on his shoulder, violent temper tantrums that results in a lot of people being hurt. Then you have Boba Fett up until around the age of 12, who is competently trained by his father and is capable of even assisting his father in achieving the goals. He is already mastering the skill set. And I've already touched on the corruption that Ara Singh provided later in his life, but it was that foundation that Jango passed on to Boba that made him as successful as he later became in life. And as I open this in part one, whether it was intentional or not, art imitates life, and that is the nuclear traditional family is the strongest in producing the most socially adapted and capable of children into adults, whereas single mother households are the weakest and have the highest level of incarcerations, drug dependency, alcohol dependency, high school dropout, illiteracy, incompetence with mathematics, science, technology, and then single fathers are almost at the same level as the nuclear traditional family at producing children, which makes one with a critical mind ask the question, if this is the documented case and the facts exist, how come this is so blatantly pushed